So I mentioned at the start of the show, we have joining us Congressman Chip Roy. He's a member of the U.S. Congress in the great state of Texas, represents CD21. He's been on the show before. He is, if those of you I think probably recognize his name, he's had many important positions in the state of Texas and in Washington. In Washington, D.C., he's a clear leader among conservatives, even though it's his first term. He'd be in the short list of anyone's list of conservative leaders in Congress. He's a very hardworking guy. He's an attorney by background. He's worked in Texas for the Texas Attorney General. He's worked for the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which was one of my go-to institutions to get rock-solid information, data on questions of great import. So he's got a great background as a lawyer and as a policy person, and now he's in Washington. And so grateful he was able to join us. Say hello, Congressman Chip Roy.
Debbie, thanks for having me on. I hope you're staying healthy and well, and glad to be a part of the show as always.
Glad to have you. And yes, we are. We're just great and kind of chomping at the bit to get out. Is where we are. But anyway, what I wanted to turn and talk with you about is, first of all, there is much discussion about the idea that we got around to where we are with COVID-19 coronavirus because of the great concern about its danger and the infection rate and lethality and all of that. But as we rolled along, and now we here in the beginning of May of 2020, there are voices talking about there should be experts of other kinds beyond just medical experts weighing in on policymaking going forward with respect to how we handle the threat from coronavirus, economists, other people. And I know your office has been a leader in that effort. So I want to ask you, what kinds of experts should also views, what kind of topics should be considered as we move forward with coronavirus policy beside medical risk?
Well, it's an important question. I mean, going back since the beginning of this, when we were seeing a lot of shutdowns occur, particularly at state and local levels, but also rhetorically coming out of Washington, I wrote a piece in National Review saying we needed a date certain for our economy in order to let capital build towards a time when we'd all be back to work. And now we're seeing the consequences now of an open-ended, unending shutdown where we've got 30 million unemployed. That number is going to go up this week. We're seeing massive devastation on Main Street, on small businesses. And importantly, we're doing all this based on initial projections, initial modeling that isn't necessarily bearing out to be true. And in fact, what we're seeing are numbers that are wildly different than the initial numbers of, a million people dying in the United States and so forth. Now, let me be perfectly clear. Neither you nor I are, ignoring the clear problems with 65,000, 70,000, whatever number's growing, dead Americans and those that are suffering as a result of it. And our friends in New York are getting absolutely pounded. But that being said, we need to look across the United States. We need to make rational decisions to answer your question. We need people in the room with the president and with governors across the country, focusing in on questions like, what are the second and third order impacts of complete shutdown? What are we doing for people's health and well-being with respect to cancer screenings? What woman today is going to wake up and find out she's got stage 3 or 4 breast cancer instead of stage 1 if she would have been getting a screening 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ago? What are we seeing in terms of crime increasing because we're letting criminals out, or we're now in a situation where people are economically suffering? These are the kinds of questions when you're talking about a shutdown of our entire United States economy that needs to be a factor in the decision making, both for the president as well as, frankly, governors and local leaders in cities, for example, in your hometown of Dallas, where the county judge, frankly, is clamping down, in my opinion, overly aggressively. In I said commissioner, but the leadership there is clamping down on businesses like hair salons and stopping people from being able to go out and do their work. So I think we need to have a complete review of all of this.
I love that. And I meant to mention for our listeners, the article that Congressman Roy mentioned a moment ago, Americans Need a Date Certain. I meant to mention that when we started, when I was introducing you. It was published actually back, so you were very prescient, Congressman Roy, because it was published March 20th. And if you go to our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop down list of links, you will see that article linked there. It was very early on recognizing we had a crisis and we have to deal with it, but we need to have some sense, ability to plan, ability to know when are we going to get back to normal. So it's called Americans Need a Date Certain. Well, I also want to commend your office has come up with something which I love, and the overall effort's called Let America Open. And among the many things, I want to first of all urge our listeners to go see that website, Let America Open. I think it's .com. LetAmericaOpen.com. But it really lists out. It's the most data-filled, fabulous website because it lays out for people all of the other potential impacts on America as a whole, stemming from the shutdown, not just the number of lives we may or may not have saved, which is relevant, of course, but the number of people who are under threat because of the growing substance abuse, domestic violence, suicide. And so what is it this website is really extraordinary because I think it's a gathering place for people who are concerned about this shutdown to go and say, look at all the data that's been gathered. So talk about this effort, Let America Open.
Yeah, you described it very well. I don't need to add too much other than the goal here was to take a lot of the things that have been flying around about this and misinformation, and some people are listening to certain people and whatnot. We need to have a better effort to be able to say, hey, what's actually happening? And everybody, because it's not just whether or not, government gets out of the way. We also need to make sure people have the confidence to go back. They need to understand the data. And so we wanted to put in one place the ability for people to see that. We wanted to have social media and start putting it out and under the banner, Let America Open, because frankly, the people ought to be able to decide. That's what we do best in the United States. People can vote with their feet. If you walk into a restaurant and you think it's clean and they're doing a great job and they're wearing masks or they're wearing gloves and they're doing everything to make you feel comfortable, you're going to go back. I've already done that. I went to a restaurant Friday morning as soon as they were open in Austin, Texas. We're on the front page of the paper, 1 in a million. And it was great. And they were so grateful that we were there. Last night, some friends and I, we went to another restaurant in South Austin, same thing. And they're working, they've got styrofoam cups and they're doing all this stuff to try to, minimize, the impact or potential spread of the virus. I felt comfortable there. The American people need to know that and see that. Let us vote with our feet. So we're wanting to put out information to get people comfortable and also to put pressure. I'm going to be honest with you, put pressure on Congress, on the president, on governors, on local officials in particular, to stop getting in the way of the American people. Enough. We don't need any tin-bot little, petty tyrants in your local, county commissioners or your local mayors getting in the way of the American people carrying out their business, being able to decide for themselves whether to cut their hair or get their hair cut, decide for themselves whether to serve food or to be served. And we need to stop what we're seeing where you're clamping down on people on public beaches. But that's insanity, right? Sun is being said to, and heat kills the virus. Vitamin D is good for us generally, and it's good to fight the virus. And I got to give credit where it's due. I never thought I would do this. Bill Maher had the rant of rants 3 days ago, basically saying, hey guys, for thousands of years we've been fighting microbes and fighting bacteria and fighting viruses. We win this with our strong immune systems, not by shutting down and crying in the corner. I don't often agree with Bill Maher, but he happened to be right on this one, minus a few expletives as he might be prone to do.
Well, I agree. Actually, I've heard more than a few conservatives saying, wow, every once in a while, Bill Maher kind of hits it out of the park. And most times he says things you're just thinking, what is he thinking? But I agree. It is a wonderful thing. On your project, Let America Open, I urge people to go because the other reason I think that we are having a hard time in this country, there's so much fear built up based on data about the disease. And so that seems to block out reason in some people's thinking about all the other consequences. But when you lay out this data that is, I mentioned before, domestic and child abuse, crime, cancer, as you say, people not getting tested as in the normal course, heart disease. There was a doctor talking recently about someone having symptoms of a heart attack and afraid to go to the hospital, either because he thought he wouldn't get in or because he thought I might catch coronavirus. And so, suffering a heart attack at home. And so the fear has to be dissipated and people encouraged we have to have a whole of America approach in responding to this, I guess I'm trying to say.
The example you just raised, I don't want to keep privacy here to where it was, but I talked to a healthcare provider who described to me the situation of a woman who was going through chest pains and called in and they said, look, we need to send, EMS, we need to come check you out and take you in. And she didn't want to do it because she'd been led to believe that she'd be at high risk of going into the hospital and dealing with the potential virus. Now, let's keep in mind that, first of all, in many cases, particularly in, say, the rural parts of the Hill Country that I represent. For example, Kerr County has had 5 cases in 50,000 residents. Bandera County has had 6 cases. I mean, I can go around the horn, but the numbers are relatively small, a few hundred basically in most of the Hill Country I represent. And people in the hospitals are set up to deal with it. And look, let me be clear. We did a good job and the right thing to pause for a week or two to get our hospitals situated, to get PPE lined up, and get ourselves ready to be able to deal with the virus. But now the curve flattening, which was designed to get our healthcare system up in order, now has turned into a multi-month shutdown where we literally, I mean, Debbie, say it out loud, 30 million unemployed Americans over the last, 6 weeks. 30 million. Compare that to the number of jobs gained since the 2008 and 9 financial crisis. We've had about 22 million jobs gained during that window. We've lost more jobs in the last 6 weeks than we gained in the last decade. Now, I'm a believer, just so people stay positive, that we can have a V-bounce, that we can come back, that the fundamentals of the economy in February were strong and they will be strong again. But look, Debbie, unless we take the reins of our economy and our lives, get back in the saddle, and get going and go buy food and go buy stuff and go to the stores and do so positively and optimistically, our economy is going to stay shut down and people will get harmed through the data you just alluded to: suicides, opioid addiction, heart disease, cancer screenings because they can't get to doctors, but also just the stress of economic devastation. We got to get back in the saddle now.
Amen to that. I want to turn and talk to you, though. There has been, as you well know, as a member of Congress, Congressman Chip Roy, there have been bills in Congress that passed and signed by the president that are, there was some concern we have to have because the government shut down the economy and people can't go to work because of the shutdown. People thought we needed some bridge funding, something to help people, but it's become extraordinarily expensive. We had the most recent bill was $2.2 trillion. We have other ones coming down the pipeline. Are you concerned that we are, number one, building dependency, and number two, we are simply kind of funding the state's ability to keep people home, to choose the course of keeping people home because there's no consequence to the state? They said, don't worry, folks, we're going to keep you shut down, but don't worry, Uncle Sam's going to bail us out. Does that concern you?
Very much so. One of the things that is a moral hazard is allowing local and state politicians to make decisions to shut down the economy in the name of public health and to stop people from carrying out their livelihoods, and then go to the federal government for the federal government to bail out not only the private citizens that they're clamping down from being able to do their work, but also ask to be bailed out for the state and local tax revenues that they're losing, say hotel taxes, sales taxes. And this is a serious moral hazard problem. Now, keep in mind, state and local governments raise about $1.6 trillion a year last year, maybe a couple of years ago, from tax revenue. Federal government has already allocated $161 billion for state and local government, which is 10% of their total haul annually. And now they're already back begging for more, and Speaker Pelosi and others are saying, oh, we got to give it to them. Now, look, do I have some local governments that are hurting because tax revenues, hotel revenues are getting hurt? Absolutely. San Antonio is a big tourist city. Austin is a big tourist city. Conventions, they're getting hammered. But we've got to have a review of spending. We got to look at the $3 trillion we've allocated, do an audit, review it, check it, make sure that we know how those dollars are being spent before we spend another single dollar, not one more dollar. We need to make sure that we're not going to spend another dollar for any jurisdictions that are currently locking down the ability of people to go engage in commerce. That's my view. We need to set the rules and the parameters. You're going to be open. You're going to spend your money wisely. We're going to go through an audit and make sure that we know that you've gotten these federal dollars. And by the way, we need to put some checks in place for future federal spending so that we don't keep racking up more debt and deficits. We need to put caps in place now. I'm not interested in any more of these, throwing dollars to the wind. Now, I voted for the bill last week because I didn't think it was fair to look at almost 1 million businesses who are left out of the PPP program, able to go get dollars through the system. And these businesses were getting crushed almost through a government taking, like eminent domain, because government was saying you can't be open. So I held my nose to support those bills. Very tough for me to do, but do it because of these businesses who were getting absolutely crippled. But enough. We need to do our job. We need to review the spending at hand, and we need to get business back to work and get people producing wealth like we always do in America.
Love that. I meant to comment also about your point a moment ago. I love the idea. It's a kind of basic American tenet of trusting the individual to live and make decisions for themselves. That is not a message you're hearing much out of Washington, or frankly out of the states. There's kind of it's the opposite message. You people can't be trusted to figure things out, so we're going to resolve things for you. And that's unhealthy for America, for Texas especially. We are, all people, we always think we're kind of the leaders in liberty and the leaders of self-reliance. We got to get back to that. Okay, two of the things I want to hit very quickly. One is you introduced in Congress the Beat China Act. And and basically it's about the idea we need to have America reduces dependency on China. Can you say a couple words about that?
Sure, real quick. That bill is designed to make sure we bring drug manufacturers back to the United States. Too many have been going offshore, particularly to China. China produces a huge percentage, 97% of our antibiotics or the materials that go into making it come through China. They've already threatened us with some of their withholding of PPE and some of our pharmaceuticals. We need to bring a lot of that manufacturing back to our shores, our territories, and our good friends. So this bill would increase tax incentives. It would reduce and drop the depreciation amount down. It would allow them to take a one-year deal in the first year, all of which would help move these pharmaceutical companies back to the United States. We should do that as one step of many to reduce our dependence on China.
Love that. I know we were about out of time we committed, but I do one other quick question. There was a story that I was reading. I could not believe it was actually happening in America, but it relates to, because of the threat of coronavirus and officials trying to prevent the spread, churchgoers in Kansas City were being ordered by Kansas City to the Kansas City Missouri officials, requiring churches to submit a list of members and attendees along with their names, addresses, and telephone numbers to city officials for tracking and surveillance purposes. Much talk about tracking, tracing Americans to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Is any of that justified?
No, at the end of the day, no. I mean, if you're doing some basic level, tracing and asking people, hey, where have you been? We want to make sure people, aren't, exposed, or if they were exposed, they know it. That's reasonable for local governments to try to figure that out and help share that information. But what we're seeing right now is a massive expansion of the police state and of the power of government, all back on the back of the fear people have of this virus. We don't want to do that. We want to protect civil liberties. We want to protect people's right to go to church. We want to reduce our reliance on China. And oh, by the way, we want to eliminate the regulations that we now see weren't necessary. I introduced legislation to end those that have already been terminated by this president and suspend those. Why do we want to bring those back? So there's a lot of things we can do out of this, but protecting civil liberties is one of the most important. So this is why one of the other reasons why we started, make sure that we do the right thing to get America open, and letamericaopen.com.
Love it. Congressman Chip Roy, I so appreciate you had time to talk today. Thank you so much for joining me on America Can We Talk?
Thanks, Debbie. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you so much. Friends, that is a great congressman in the great state of Texas. You can find more about him. I really do want you to go to see the letamericaopen.com website, full of data. You're going to love having Congressman Chip Roy, just a great stalwart patriot and defender of freedom. So I'm so glad he could join us today. That was just great.